Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica, another episode of the Unported playlist where we take a look at some of my favorite unported arcade games of all time. Today we're taking a look at Virtua Fighter 4 Final Tuned. I know what you're thinking, Virtua Fighter 4 was ported to consoles, and that is true, but like a lot of fighting games, they have revisions, and some of them are arcade exclusives, and Final Tune has never been released on any other arcade platforms. Before we get too far involved in the game, if you could do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like, subscribe, ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined, we have a Patreon link down below as well if you want to support the channel. But I've already covered a few different Virtua Fighter games on my channel, and I absolutely love Virtua Fighter 4. It may actually be my favorite entry in the series, and Final Tuned just adds to the overall game. Virtua Fighter 4 came home to consoles, and even some of the revisions did, but a lot of fighting games have slight tweaks, balance adjustments, adding stages and characters to extended arcade releases, and sometimes those don't actually come home. Kind of like with Virtua Fighter 5, the final edition that was released in arcades is only available on one of the Yakuza games in the arcade. You can't actually buy a disc or even download the game to play at home in its final version. You have to play a Yakuza game and go into the arcades in Kamurocho and find it, which is fun and amazing, but unfortunately the same treatment hasn't been given to Virtua Fighter 4 Final Tuned. If you've ever played Virtua Fighter 4, Final Tuned is just a better, more complete version of the game, but it is still the classic Virtua Fighter formula. It's just a few buttons, but the complexity in Virtua Fighter 4 comes in the timing and how you use those buttons. It's a very easy game to learn and a very difficult game to master. When Virtua Fighter 5 had an actual audience on the Xbox 360 version, because the PlayStation 3 version didn't have online play, I was ranked like 70th in the world, and I'm not bragging, I'm not usually that good at games, maybe the user base at that point in time was pretty low, but I've played Virtua Fighter to death, and I've always loved learning it. And as far as 3D fighting games that don't just occur on a 2D plane are concerned, this is my absolute favorite 3D fighting game series around. I think it's so much better than Tekken. I'm sure a lot of people would disagree with me on that, but I love it. And even here in the snow, as it's kind of deforming and depressing, this ran on the Sega NAOMI 2. You get sort of a lot of accolades on how like the PlayStation 4 handled snow effects when you're walking around, how there was footprints in the snow in games like The Last of Us and things such as that, Death Stranding. But Sega was doing it a long time before that, and obviously it's not to the same caliber, but it's really impressive just how much the terrain deforms as you're fighting on top of it. The game looks beautiful. It looks better than anything that the PlayStation 2 could do to my eye, and all the NAOMI 2 was an expanded Dreamcast spec with more chips, more RAM, and more power. But this is basically if you duct taped 3 Dreamcasts together and made them run in tandem. And I especially love all the backgrounds in this game, the different fighting arenas. They're all unique, they're all colorful, they're all amazing looking. And if you look at the Great Wall of China in the background, it's receding off all over the place, and it is still all based in polygons. And you even have those far flags on that tower behind us, and they're still flowing in the breeze. So it's just an outstanding looking game, and it's constantly running at 60 frames per second while looking this good. And that ring out mechanic is definitely one you can use to your advantage. It's not the most impressive way to win a match, but if you can push your opponent who's blocking you too much towards the edge, they're either going to be forced out of the arena, or sometimes, like you see here, they're actually going to walk out themselves. It's a cheap mechanic, but it is still one that is in there, and it is fun to talk about. But I just love Virtua Fighter how it moves. It's not the fastest 3D fighting game ever. It feels a little bit more methodical. You can move fast and you can be aggressive and you can really run in, or you can sit back and you can block and you can wait for your openings. Because as you'll see on the power bars, the life gauge up top, it doesn't take that many strikes to actually remove all your opponent's health. In a good combo, you can take a third to half of a life bar off. It kind of feels in a way like the Samurai Showdown games in the same way. Obviously those are 2D weapons-based games versus a 3D fighting game, but it's still the same setup where 1 or 2 really solid strikes and you can win a match. And I do really appreciate that. And you can even use the walls to your advantage, kind of like fighting vipers. Knocking your opponent against them can take a little bit more life off, or you can kind of pin them down to the point where they really have to fight back harder, and you can use those openings to be able to strike them and get their life bar down. I will say the game can get quite difficult, and Lau is not usually my main character. He's kind of a secondary that I like playing with, so maybe if I had picked my primary, this would have been a bit easier. But as you go on, the game is definitely going to put a lot of resistance up against you, and it is going to feel like a challenge. But like any fighting game, it's definitely going to get a lot better if you have friends around to play with, especially if they like Virtua Fighter, because competitively, this is going to be an awesome game to play. But you will see here, I am going to take my first loss. We are going to switch characters. So what I'll let you do is just watch the next round without me talking, because I love the strike sound effects. Everything feels really impactful, and even the soundtrack in the background. For a fighting game, it's really good. It's there, it's not distracting, and it's a ton of fun. But I'll be back in about 45 seconds. We'll close that on Virtua Fighter 4, but enjoy.
Fight 1! Ready? Go!
Maybe I should pull back a little.
Fight 1!
And you'll see there with Sarah, I am a lot better at the game, and she is usually my main character in all Virtua Fighter releases. When I did the video on the Saturn for Virtua Fighter 2, I used her from start to finish, if I remember correctly. But the one asterisk about emulating this game is, if you're using an NVIDIA card, there can be some graphical glitches on select stages, and weirdly enough, that does not exist if you're using an AMD card. It must just be a driver issue or some effect that the NVIDIA cards just can't handle compared to AMD, and it really doesn't affect much of the gameplay whatsoever. It's just going to happen on one water stage if you encounter it. It's not a guarantee, and in the final boss arena. But I do love, Sarah, how you can kind of keep that leg up and you can feign an attack and then kind of time your strike exactly when you want it to be. I just love the timing in this game. If you miss a strike, that's either because your opponent was able to read you and block, or you miss a strike because you executed that command or input at the wrong time. This is, like I said earlier, a very easy game to learn. You can get from start to finish in Virtua Fighter probably on your third or fourth attempt at normal difficulty, but to actually get really good at a game like Virtua Fighter takes a really long time, and that learning experience is what I love so much about the game, because you can just continually play it and evolve your skills and get better as you go along. And I would definitely say Virtua Fighter 4 is my #1 favorite game in the series, and I only have a Sega NAOMI, not a NAOMI 2, but I'm definitely thinking about upgrading my motherboard because the NAOMI is backwards compatible, and this is a release that I just really absolutely want to have in my collection. If you don't need the final version, definitely buy the PlayStation 2 version. It is quite good, but if you're like me and you want the best possible version of Virtua Fighter 4, either emulate this, and if you have an AMD card it'll be easier, or pick up an arcade board for it, because you'll see here on the final stage that graphical glitch is going to occur. It must be a reflection or something, and I'm going to have to fight Doral as an invisible entity, which luckily enough I was able to win on the first attempt, but it can be a little strange. Short of that, we'll be back next Sunday with an episode of the Unported playlist, and we'll have videos on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday as well. If you do me a huge favor, go like and subscribe. Short of that, bye-bye.